Like I said before, my name is Frank Wollenhaupt, and I love glass. I guess you might say I'm a glassaholic. I've been collecting and dealing in glass for over 30 years. I'm not a glass chemist or anything. I just like how glass is made and try to research it and find out, what it's all about. Have any of you ever seen glass being made? Have you been down to Fenton? Anybody been to Fenton, see how glass is made? Okay, so that ends my topic then. Anyhow, the origin of glass is lost in history. Some people say that a lightning strike hit a sand deposit, had the proper potash and some other chemicals there, and the first piece of glass was formed that way. I don't know, it's been lost in history exactly how the first piece was made. But early on, the Ohio Valley was very big in glass production. In the mid-1800s, natural gas was found in the Fostoria area, Findlay-Fostoria area. It was offered free to any industries that wanted to come in and set up a business. So some of the earlier factories in Ohio was up in the Fostoria, Findlay area. They had natural gas. They had a lot of silica sand, which is one of the raw ingredients, soda ash, limestone. Before long, there were 12 factories working in the area. But by the late 1800s, most of the glass manufacturing had shifted to Ohio, West Virginia Valley. A lot of the large glass companies of that time were Heisey, Cambridge, Westmoreland, Fenton Art Glass from Williamstown, West Virginia, Fostoria started up in Fostoria, moved to Moundsville, Imperial Glass in Bel Air, Ohio. And about the only glass factory today still in existence of any size is Fenton from down in Williamstown, West Virginia. What is glass? How's it made? In doing research for the talk at the Carolina cafeteria, I kept running into the story that, hey, glass is a liquid. It's just a very slow liquid. Take a look at old window panes. You'll see how it sags, how it's thicker at the bottom. Well, doing research and everything, it kind of put that as nothing but an old wives' tale. It really is a solid. It's just some of the poor glass that was made early on, very thick at one end and thin at the other. How do you make glass? Well, glass is very similar to making a cake. You've got raw ingredients. Instead of egg and flour and butter and vanilla and stuff like that, they have many different chemicals like sands and borax, aluminum oxide, calcium carbonate. I got formulas from 1917. Cambridge had 1,000 pounds of sand, 375 pounds of soda, 100 pounds of lime, 45 pounds of nitrate, 4.5 pounds of arsenic, 23 ounces of manganese, 1 1/4 ounce of powdered blue. We got many different formulas here. Some of them are for crystal glass. I got a Ritz blue formula. I got a cheap lead glass formula. Some of the information I found also, talking about the raw deposits of sand, they said that less than 1/2 of 1 ounce of iron in a batch of sand will ruin a 2,000 batch of glass. So you stop and think about it, 1/2 of 1 ounce isn't very much, but it's enough to ruin the batch and the color. They've come up with some interesting things. They say that potash in a glass batch will brighten the glass. Borax will add to the brightness of the glass. To decolorize the glass, 10 pounds of manganese, 6 ounces of powdered blue. You mix this in a batch, and you take about 10 to 11 ounces, and that's enough to decolorize 400 to 450 pounds of sand. Just getting the pure sand is only the start of the process. The sand has to go through many additional processes. One, they run it over a magnet screen to separate any iron ore powders out of it. Once they get it washed and cleaned, they'll then grind it to a real powder consistency, kind of like flour. This kind of gives you an indication of an early process of the people mixing the different batch. And on the back, we show something similar to a cement mixer that we put all the raw chemicals in and completely tumbled it to make sure everything is properly mixed. Preparing the batch is a pretty exacting process. Like I said, it's kind of like baking a cake or any other. You follow a recipe. You know, a quarter of an ounce of this makes a major difference. So it might look dark and dank and not like the people know what they're doing, but they've got very small scales where they can weigh out quarter ounce of this or a gram of that and get the exact same color time and time again. I know Cambridge and Heisey both, their colors were true from 1 year to the next to 10 years following. So they had to have very, you know, specific chemical formulas and everything else. The one thing that hurt Cambridge a lot was during the war and different time periods where a lot of the raw materials weren't available and they had to go to a substitute. So that's why sometimes we can find some small offhand pieces that maybe they were trying different colors to come back up to the original color, but with a different formula. Now, after the sand is mixed and everything, they have a couple different ways of melting it. One with the cheaper kind of glass is what they call tank glass, which if we know Anchor Hocking and some of the bottles today and your peanut butter jar and so on, that's basically made out of tank glass, where they put the raw formula into one side, and as it progresses through the heating process, it comes out finished glass on the other side. This is normally the way machine glass is made and things like that today. Very few hand operations are made. The kind of glass we're talking about here today, Heisey and Cambridge and some of the higher class hand companies made, they use what they call pots. And this is kind of an example of what a pot looked like. It's a ceramic type of item that has been made to a specific size and shape. It then is glazed on the inside, and they are warmed in a specific oven to bring them up to temperature, and so they've always got some tanks ready to go. Once a furnace is fired, the Heisey and Cambridge factories, the main furnace held 13 to 16 of these pots. And if one would break, spill the glass out, was called, you know, having a calf. A lot of the early glass factories, because of the temperature of the glass, anywhere between 22 and 2,500 degrees, some of the early factories would burn down because they were made out of wood. The hot glass, the hot molten glass hits the wood. Next thing you know, you've got a fire. As I said, some of the pots, if it had a calf or so on, they couldn't stop production. They had to change the tank live. What that meant was they took one of the pots they had warming in, they brought her up to temperature, and then they had a crew that actually went in with a carriage. They had different members of it in asbestos suits at that point in time and some reflective aluminized type of fabric. They would go and work 10, 15 minutes at a time to take out the old tank, the old pot, and put a new one in while the rest of them are all being fired and the glass is still being in production. So again, this is a very hot operation, very dangerous, but it had to be done live. They couldn't stop, they couldn't. And again, once this thing is fired, once it's up to temperature, once the sand and chemicals are put in, it's never shut down. So it's fired 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks of the year, until something happens to it and has to be replaced. Once the chemical is charged into the pot, it melts anywhere between 20 and 30 hours. It melts between 2,000 and 3,000 degrees temperature. And once it gets melted, all of the particulate is melted in there, they call planing it up, which means they back the temperature off to about 1900 degrees. This is a working temperature. And any of the bubbles and any of the sediment and so on settles down, and it gets to a nice working temperature, if you can call 1900 degrees a nice working temperature. Heisey and Cambridge, as well as Fenton and a lot of the other major glass companies, produce glass two different ways. One way was to press it, another way was to blow it. To start making a mold to be blown in or depressed, they first started with a design, something on paper. They discussed it, between the art group or whatever. From that point, a wooden mold was made of what the final item was going to be like. Here we got a couple different stems, and again, they're made to exact shape and size of the finished ware. From this point in time, they go on to, here's Cambridge deciding what they're going to do, and this item in the center is a bowl that they decide, hey, that's the shape we want. So again, this is a carving out of wood, and they're all making a decision that, yeah, that's what we want. After that is done, they go on to the mold maker, and the mold maker looks at the item, and he says, well, I think we need to have a 2-part mold or a 3-part mold, something like that. This, for instance, is a 3-part mold. The rough casting is made, and then he sets about with hand tools and actually chips the design in the mold. So the more intricate they are, they can go from a 2-piece, which is a very simple mold, up to a 3-4 piece. And they can actually have fonts on the top of it, they can have different plates on the bottom and so on, again, depending on what the item is. This item would have been a blow mold. And again, the blow mold is normally just a 2-piece type of mold. The stem and foot are put on separate. Okay, now we've got our molds made. How do we get the glass into the mold? Well, we've got, again, 2 different ways to do that. This is what's called a punny, and we notice a little small ball on the end of it. This is directly proportional to the amount of glass this punny will pick up. So the punny, as we can see from this, was taken and dipped into just the top of the glass, rolled to get a gather of glass, taken out, held over the opening. The glass then would run off, and the next guy had a simple pair of scissors, snipped it off. That simple, Actually, it was a lot more than that, because we've got items that are very heavy. Today, if you see a piece of Fenton, we see a late piece of Imperial, very heavy. The glass workers don't have the touch and everything that the early Heisey, early Cambridge, the old workers had. Glass is relatively inexpensive, but again, that tank, the more items they could get out of that tank, the more items they could make during a turn, and a turn was 4 hours of glass production, the more they could make. So again, if you had the right size ball to get the right size together to fill that mold, you didn't waste any glass, because once it's on here, they had to scrape it off, They couldn't dip it back in because now you're going to have bubbles, you're going to have lines because this is cold, that's hot. So again, they matched this size ball to the size of mold. Can you imagine on your large Greek key punch bowl or something? Some of those required 2 people getting together at the same time, going over to the mold at the same time, the glass in unison going in, being snipped, and then pressed. Like I said, that is one way of pressing. Another way of making glass is blowing glass. And like I said, the stems here are blown. The process is the same that we gather it out of the tank, except this time we use a blowpipe. And if you notice, it's got kind of not a ball on the end, but just kind of a flattened end. Again, we take it in the tank, roll it on the top, and now we've got this kind of elongated ball and whatever. We take it over to what's called a marber, which is a piece of steel, cast iron, and this is rolled on the cast iron back and forth to get kind of a cylindrical shape on it, and also to put kind of a crust on the outside of it. The reason for the crust, now when I'm getting ready to put a bubble in it, I put a small bubble in it. If it was straight out, I would blow through the side of it. So with a small crust, I'm able to maintain the outside crust on it, able to maintain that bubble in there. And once I get my bubble started, I then put my finger on the end so I don't lose the air. Now from this point, I can then blow it into another mold such as this, or a goblet mold, or many other things. But it all starts with the same way. And again, this is pretty much one size fits all. So if I was doing something real large, after I got my initial bubble, I could now go back in and get another gather, because I'm not letting enough time go in between here. So I got enough I can get a second gather and so on this guy. This is showing a gentleman from the Cambridge factory. This was a photo out of the National Geographic in the 50s, called Gus Hyman. Notice his cheeks are about as big as the bubble. He was a glass blower, and all the muscles then in his cheeks got kind of blown out of proportion after a while from being a glass blower. If you've been to Fenton and have seen glass made, they do a lot of press work and a lot of mold work or blown work down there. I said the batch of glass is similar to baking a cake. I find that making glass or blowing glass and so on is similar to a ballet. If you've ever watched them, you've got 6 or 7 people in a shop. A shop is what the group of men are called. And you've got nothing, they're not really saying, hey, bring me this, bring that. Everybody's watching everybody else. And the guy who gets the glass out, and he's over here, the guy's ready with the scissors to cut, the guy's ready to press it, he's opening it up, the carrying boy is ready to come there with his tongs in and pick the item up out of it. Then we take it, what we call a snap. This item is a way to take an item like this and reheat it then in the glory hole to put it on the glass worker's bench to use his jacks and other tools to maybe flare this out. If you wanted to make a different vase or a different shape out of something like this. But again, it's spring-loaded, and this thing has been, again, preheated. So the guy is watching. Everybody's watching everybody else, and this is preheated. Again, if this was cold against the hot foot, it would snap. So we've got to have this up to a working temperature, again, someplace in the 1,000 degrees. It doesn't have to be the working temperature of the glass, but it can't be much cooler than 900 to 1,000 degrees. This little item here, we have a plain goblet, but it'd be nice to have a diamond optic in it, or a narrow optic, or in this case, this is a Cambridge pattern called Caprice. This is a Caprice optic. So I can take a plain stem, take my blowpipe, my gather, after I've had it marvered to get the right shape, I could then lower it in here. It would pick up the Caprice optic. I then go and blow it into the tumbler mold, and it transfers that optic into the tumbler. So this is a way that Heisey, Cambridge, a lot of the factories could take an existing item and throw a palm optic, a Caprice optic, a narrow optic, or whatever to it, and instead of having 6 items, they now have 12, 18, 24 different items just by adding a different optic to it. I have a selection of tools up here, and again, you had one guy that kind of led the shop, and in glass production, the guy on the glass worker's bench, he was pretty much the leader. Here's the glass worker's bench. He's sitting down there, and he's got 2 long arms, and from that position, he's responsible for shaping the glass. And that's what the majority of these tools are here. These are called jacks, used to possibly neck something down while he's spinning it constantly in motion. He's got the jacks here that he's working to neck something down, or it could be used inside to flare it out. You've seen straight-sided vases, then the next one is really flared out, or you've seen some bowls or whatever can be done with the jacks. These different things here are tongs, again, wrapped with asbestos, which OSHA would frown on today. But these items were used when an item is pressed to take it out of a mold. Again, the asbestos, sometimes you'll find a piece of glass with a little burnt spot on it, or some inclusions in it and so on. Could come from the asbestos, you know, could have picked up some pieces of carbon or whatever, but normally the asbestos item didn't leave any residue behind. A little pair of tweezers, again, can be used for flaring or attaching different things. These are a pair of Whisk shears. That's actually what they are. They're not specific glass workers' tools, but what they would do a lot of times, they'd take something simple like this and then regrind them. This was used to neck down if you were going to put a handle on something. After you had your glass and you've marbled it and you've got it a certain size, again, this could be used to cut off the very end of it to get it ready to attach for a handle. These, again, are some very specific shears. I don't know exactly their reason or purpose. These have intricate little design in them. I think they were used, a lot of times you'll see a handle that has a maker's mark on it. These were specific to an individual person. So when he's sealing it on there, kind of, you know, making sure it adheres, it leaves his mark. A lot of times on a basket handle is free form. So when it's first started, he makes sure it's on there, and again, his design and pattern. Any of you have seen Erickson glass or Tiffin, the glass with the controlled bubble in the bottom of it? This is a bubble mold. What it does, if you notice, there are a lot of little pins sticking up. When you make glass, you would take your pipe, again, put it down in there. When you take it out, actually you put her down, he's going to open the mold and then you take it out. The ball of glass has all these little dimples in it. And then you put another layer of glass on top of it, it traps air at each one of those little dimples. So that's how you get a trapped air base to a vase or a tumbler or a lot of other things. One other little thing I brought this evening, I collect a little bit more Cambridge than Heisey. Glass workers, they were always striving to improve their lot in life. They didn't want to be a carrying boy. They didn't want to be a getter all their life. They were after to get on that bench and really to work the glass. So the only way they had to move up was to practice and get better. So a lot of the glass companies allowed them on their lunch hour or in the morning or after to work with old glass out of a pot that they were done using or scrap or what have you. Cambridge, we all know the nude stemmed item that Cambridge made. Here I got a paperweight that some worker took one of the nude stemmed items that was busted off in Crown Tuscan, painted hair and facial features and so on, and made a paperweight out of it. Again, he's getting practice and knowledge and learning how to use the jacks and the tweezers and everything else. He's doing this on his own time most of the time. Okay, I know we've given a pretty quick overview of glass and how it's made and everything. Are there any questions dealing with anything up here?
What was the most skilled job in the place? Is it making the molds?
Or it's like anything else. You talk to the mold maker and he says, yeah, I'm the most skilled person here. Because he started off with a piece of raw cast iron and he was able with hand tools to carve it in. The guy on the glass workers bench says, I'm the most skilled, man. I can put handles on, I can pull spouts on, I can do all this. I think in each area they had top craftsmen and they were equal in pay and so on. The Flint Glass Workers Union early on established rates for a mold maker or a getherer or a finisher or many other things, and they could travel from Heisey to Cambridge to Fostoria to Fenton and make that same rate, because I've got my card, it's kind of like a union card. I'm a skilled carrying boy. I'm going to make 22 cents a day. Any other questions? Judy?
You talked about what they call a shop. Can you talk a little bit about how many were in a shop and what their different tasks were?
Well, a shop could comprise anywhere from 4 people up to 7 or 8 people. And again, depending on if they're doing pressed ware or if they're doing blown ware or exactly what. But your carrying boy was probably the lowliest. He was the one with the tongs that took the item out of the mold, carried it over to the leer. Now the leer was an item that they took this glass that now is cooled down to 700 or 800 degrees, put it in this device that was maybe 200-300 feet long, and it gradually took the temperature from the 700 or 800 degrees down to 100 degrees. And it would take about 24 hours to do that. So that was called an annealing leer. Without that, it would be very similar to, you ever take an ice cube, you got some warm water, hey boy, I'm thirsty, I throw the ice cube in, first thing it does is explode. That's what would happen if the glass wasn't through the annealing leer and get all the stresses and stuff out of it. So anyhow, that's the carrion boy. The gatherer is the guy who has taken the blowpipe or the punny, and as it says, he gathers the glass. He then takes it over to a mold, and you've got the presser. He operates the press. Then you've got a person called a footer, puts a foot on it, or a finisher that finishes it. And again, that's where you go anywhere from 4 people to 7 or 8 people getting. You'd have somebody, if it had a handle, if it was a picture, you'd have somebody that would stick the handle. Now, it could be the same guy on the glass worker's bench that stuck the handle, or it could be somebody that specifically, stuck the handle. Any other questions? Yes?
You talked about the pots for mold and glass. Who made those?
There are different places. There's one up in the Akron, Canton area that's still in existence today. They're more of a refractory company that it's made very similar to ceramics, or it can be actually made from block, kind of like a building block, and can actually be built up that way and use a high temperature cement to hold the blocks together. So you've got the fine ones, as we've seen, Cambridge and Heisey use, or you've got the other types that are made just like you'd build a grill, an outdoor grill.
What's the lifespan?
Lifespan, again, certain glasses were harder on them than others. Milk glass was one of the hardest ones on a pot. The chemicals in it, I think the arsenics and some of the chemicals just tended to eat away at it. You also had in the front of it, when it's on your high fire, you had a stopper that you put into it, again, to keep all of the heat, and so it would be working. This is kind of an example of what it would look like. Here's your furnace around here with each of these openings, an individual tank inside there. At night, they would put a stopper, and again, it's something about 3 inches thick, dome shaped, so it would fit in there and keep all the fire and everything in it. Sometimes during the day when they were working it, again, depending on what size, they might put a half stopper in. Again, to not let all that heat, get out, to keep some of the heat in. So they would put a half stopper this way, or I've seen some half stoppers this way. Any other questions? Yes?
You said the location of the factory was primarily, the gas availability was the primary ingredient, and where the plant was located.
Yes.
Did everybody use the same sand, or was that all a local product too, or did it come from a certain place?
There are 2-3 major sources of sand. Over in Pennsylvania, there's a couple large ones, today. And again, the purity of the sand, it's not sandbox sand. It's not the brown sand we get. It's the, you ever been out to White Sands, New Mexico, the pure white sand? It's a sand of that type.
So they ship that in? They
ship it in. But again, the closer you can be to the raw materials, the less expense you have in shipping everything in. So natural gas and or coal would be your heat source. Sand would be your other major ingredient because of weight and the quantity they use. Sand is the bulk of it. Sand is probably 75% of your batch. So raw materials, natural gas or heat source. Yes?
Take that through the steps for me, where it would start and where it would end. If you can, I'm sure you can.
Oh my! Okay. We've got a pressed foot. I'm sorry, a pressed stem. The stem is pressed. The bowl is blown, and the foot is put on by hand. So we start with the blowpipe. We get our gather, we marver it, we put a little bubble into it, we then blow it into a mold like this to get our bowl. That's our first thing. And about the same time I'm getting this done, there's another group working here in a press. He's now pressed the stem so I can add my bowl to that stem while it's still hot. Now, if I've cooled down a little bit, the item can be taken back to the glory hole. The glory hole is the hottest part of the fire. You put her in there again to take an area and get it back up to working temperature, because it's cooled off and I want it to stick. So to make sure that sticks properly, I've got to get it back up to temperature. So the one shop has made our bowl, and again, it still has glass up on the top of it. It's still rough and so on up here. I then have attached it to my stem that's just come out of the press. My little carry-on boy's got this, and I probably got it upside down, and he's stuck it on here this way. And about the time he's got this on here this way and he's got it this way, I'm going to take her back over here and heat her up in the glory hole just a little bit, because the next guy's coming with this, and he's got a little gather of glass, and he's going to put it right on the bottom of this. And it now is on a snap like this, and it's back to the finisher's bench. He's working this, and he's got an apple paddle made out of apple wood. Looks like a paddle that maybe you got some whippings when you were young. It looks similar to that, and he's flattening out this foot. It's rolling back and forth, and he's flattening his foot out. And he's got a set of gauges that are made out of metal that he'll check the size of the foot with his gauge. So, crude that they are, time and time again, we've got something that's very, very close, very, very close, time and time again. And that's how we've got 3 different groups working in the shop to make this one item. We've got a blow, a press, and a piece of molten glass. Any other questions?
Who safeguarded the formulas for the glass? Are the owners pretty careful about that?
I have seen formula books by individual glass chemists and so on. They're pretty much proprietary to them. Now, yes, they're an employee of Heisey, or yes, they're an employee of whatever, but they're pretty particular. They hold on to those. And we do know that recently there was a chemist by the name of Helmers. He worked at Heisey, he worked at Fostoria, he worked at Cambridge, and he ended up at Mantle Lamp Company. And he made the Alicite at Mantle Lamp Company. He made Crown Tuscan at Cambridge. He also made Heather Bloom, Wisteria, Alexandrite. He was the chemist on those formulas. He took that formula book with him, and he tweaked it a little bit different for Cambridge. He tweaked it a little bit different for Heisey. He tweaked it a little bit different for Fostoria. So the management couldn't come down on him and say, hey, you copied, you took. Well, he didn't really. It's his, and he tweaked it a little bit. Anything else?
This piece, as opposed to that one, it has the same dimensions, more or less, but would this be entirely pressed?
Yes.
Thank you.
And if we look down it, we can see a mold line coming straight up from here. You see this whole thing was pressed. And that was probably the mold that was not just a simple 3-piece that had another stack on top of it. Anything else?
How many could they make a day or a shift?
Okay, glass workers, their shift consisted of 4 hours. It was called a turn. Okay, so during a glass worker's day, there were 2 turns. And they had a production schedule that said of this little thing, do not make 350 of them. That's humping on for 4 hours, make 350. Now, if he made 400, that means he made 50 over, so they are starting to get piecework now. So anytime they get over their move, they're into piecework. It might only be a penny a piece. But then that 50 times a penny is 50 cents, all 7 of them got to share that 50 cents. So I got my 6.5 cents or whatever a piece, you know. So 4-hour shifts, and again, some small items like toothpick holders would be 300, 400, 500 of them. Some large things like punch bowls might be, you know, 40 or 50. But you see them work, man. It's just like, you know, nobody talks. It's just like a ballet. One's right there because they know they've got to get it, you know. They're not sitting around waiting for the guy to get together. When they're done pressing this, they got her back up. They got the mold back. They're cutting it again. Just like that. Just like, you know, arm, just cutting it. Any other questions? Yes?
The blue, what is that? Is that a chemical in the little jar?
All these are chemicals that went to different batches.
Okay, the blue, did that make color, or was that just,
Blue is probably cobalt oxide and so on. It was used to make light blue or Stiegel blue or whatever, again, depending on the quantity of it in. Anything else?
And what chemicals were used to make the different colors of, well, I'm familiar with the Heisey, the green, the blue. You know, you said cobalt blue for blue, and just different formulas for the
Different formulas, and again, selenium was used to make a brown or to make a red, depending on the quantity of the chemical in, and depending on if it was reheated or not. Some colors, Cambridge made a color called Robina. This is a heat-sensitive glass, and what that means is it came out of the mold being pressed kind of a icky greenish blue color. They then put her on the snap, or put her on another type of snap, put her back into the glory hole, and that hot heat would then strike it, which means it would turn it to a bright red. So you would have this going from a red to a blue to a green color. And if you were skilled, you could then go back to the blue and back to the red. So glass chemistry in itself, and again, I'm no glass chemist. I'm not a glass worker. I know nothing about this other than I enjoy glassmaking. So there are many, many things to do many, many different things with. Okay. This is the Robina. As we can see, red top going down from a blue down to the green. And again, it was probably put on a snap this way into the glory hole, change this bluish green color to the red. Anything else? Thank you.